Imagine this, a man who once declared himself a god, a pharaoh who ruled the strongest empire of his time, feared, worshipped, and remembered as one of the most powerful kings of ancient Egypt. And yet, more than 3,000 years after his death, his body is still here, preserved, discovered, and scanned. Even today you can see the lines on his face, the teeth in his mouth, even the disease in his bones. But here's the mystery. How did an ancient book, written 1400 years ago, long before modern archaeology, history, or medicine, describe not only his death, but also the fact that his body would remain preserved as a sign and warning for generations to come? Coincidence or something far greater? Before we explore this mystery, let me tell you this. Our channel, Proof Vault, is beginning a journey into hidden history, where archaeology, science, and ancient scriptures meet. Every episode we uncover one powerful story, stories that make us question, reflect, and wonder if there is knowledge beyond human imagination. So if you are curious or searching for the truth behind history's greatest mysteries, subscribe and join us. Because what you're about to hear is not just history, it's a mystery. And to understand this mystery, we must step back in time, back to ancient Egypt, one of the most advanced civilizations the world has ever known. Here, kings were called pharaohs, and pharaohs were seen not just as rulers but as living gods. They built massive temples and pyramids that still amaze us today. They commanded armies that stretched Egypt's power across borders, and they left behind monuments carved in stone, inscriptions that told the world of their victories, their wealth, and their claim to immortality. But behind the glory was another side.
Cruelty to slaves.
Oppression of the weak. And pharaohs were so arrogant, they believed no one, not even the Creator, could stand against them. And when a man from among his own people confronted him, urging to abandon oppression and follow what was right, Pharaoh responded not with reflection, but with threats of death. Blinded by arrogance, he chose violence over truth. The man fled, and Pharaoh, certain no one could escape his reach, pursued him beyond the borders of his own empire. But just as he believed victory was within his grasp, fate turned against him. Surrounded by water, the self-proclaimed god met an end no power could prevent. He drowned, and he died. This is where our story begins. A kingdom at its height of power. A pharaoh who believed his throne was eternal. And hidden within this empire is a mystery that would outlast him for thousands of years. A mystery written in scripture, carved in history, and preserved in the very body of a man who once called himself a god. But what do the ancient books actually say about this moment? First, the Bible. In the book of Exodus, chapters 14 and 15, the story is clear. Pharaoh chased Moses and the Israelites into the sea, but the waters returned and drowned his army. Pharaoh's chariots and his host hath he cast into the sea. Exodus 15:4. The focus is on his defeat and the destruction of his power. Centuries later, the Quran told the same story, but with one striking difference. In Surah Yunus 10:90-92, Pharaoh is shown drowning as he pursued the Israelites, yet verse 92 adds something unique. So today we will save you in body, that you may be to those who succeed you a sign. Both the Bible and the Quran are among the most studied and preserved books in human history. Whether one approaches them as faith or as literature, there is no doubt about what they say. Both record the drowning of Pharaoh, and one of them adds the extraordinary claim that his body would remain. And that is where history and science step in. For centuries, the story of Pharaoh's drowning lived only in scripture and tradition. No physical evidence, no preserved body to point to. In fact, many historians and skeptics dismissed these accounts as legend, stories with no ground in reality. But in the late 19th century, everything changed. In 1881, archaeologists uncovered a hidden royal cache in Deir el-Bahari, Egypt. Inside were dozens of mummies of ancient pharaohs and nobles. The discovery included more than 40 preserved bodies, among them some of the most powerful rulers in history, Ramesses II, Seti I, and Thutmose III. The world was stunned. Here were pharaohs who had ruled Egypt more than 3,000 years ago, now lying in front of scientists, wrapped and preserved. The belief that these kings were forever lost to time was shattered in a single moment. But this discovery was only the beginning. As experts studied the mummies, one body in particular began to raise more questions than answers. Signs within this pharaoh's remains seemed to echo an ancient verse that spoke of his body being preserved as a warning. What were those signs, and could they really connect a man who once called himself a god, with words written more than 1,000 years later? By the 1970s, Ramesses II's body was in danger. Cracks spread across his skin, and fungus began eating away at what had lasted for 3,000 years. Egypt had to decide: let their greatest pharaoh turn to dust or take a step no one imagined. In 1974, they chose the unthinkable and took the unprecedented step of sending his mummy abroad for restoration. Before Ramesses II could even leave the country, Egyptian law required every traveler to carry a valid passport. And so, more than 3,000 years after his death, officials issued the passport in his name. It listed his occupation as simply the king, deceased. When his coffin arrived in Paris, the surreal continued. He wasn't treated as a relic or an artifact. He was welcomed like royalty. The French military stood in formation. Salutes were fired. Ramesses II, the pharaoh who once declared himself a god, was received with full state honors, as if a living king had just stepped off the plane. But the most astonishing part was still to come. French scientists, led by Dr. Maurice Bucaille, began to examine the body. What they discovered inside this pharaoh's remains would raise more questions than answers and connect science to scripture in ways no one expected. In Paris, Dr. Maurice Bucaille began his examination of Ramesses II. At first, it seemed like a routine study of an ancient king, but the deeper he looked, the stranger the evidence became. Traces of salt were discovered inside the body, unusual for a man who had ruled on land. Damage in the tissues hinted at a violent, sudden death, consistent with drowning. And yet, unlike most who perish at sea, this body had not been lost. It had been preserved, intentionally and with remarkable detail, just as ancient scripture had described centuries earlier. For Bucaille, this was not simply science. It was a collision between medicine, archaeology, and the words of scripture. The discovery left him stunned, and later he would write his famous book, The Bible, the Quran, and Science, exploring how these findings aligned with sacred texts in ways few had expected. But the investigation didn't end in the 1970s. As technology advanced, Ramesses II's body was studied again, this time with X-rays and CT scans. The results were even more revealing: fractures in the bones, evidence of embalming done in haste, and more signs of a sudden unnatural death. Layer after layer, modern science kept uncovering exactly what the ancient record had claimed all along. But here's the part no one expected. The science was not contradicting scripture, it was confirming it. And this leaves us with a haunting question. How could a book, written more than 1,000 years earlier, describe the fate of this pharaoh with such precision? More than 3,000 years later, today, the body of Ramesses II still exists, visible to anyone who visits the museum in Cairo. His empire is gone, his monuments weathered, but his body remains. And modern science, through examinations, X-rays, and CT scans, has confirmed what was written centuries earlier in ancient scripture, that his death was sudden and that his body would be preserved as a sign for generations to come. Think about that. Out of all the kings of Egypt, out of all the rulers who once held power, it is this pharaoh's body that remains intact. For some, this might be coincidence, history and science lining up by chance. For others, it feels like undeniable evidence of something greater, a connection between the words of scripture and the discoveries of today. What we can all agree on is this: the man once feared as a god now rests as an object of study. His body scanned, photographed, displayed behind glass. A powerful reminder that even the mightiest rulers cannot escape the judgment of time. Whether you see this as coincidence or prophecy, one question lingers. Was his preservation a random accident of history, or a message meant for us to see? Like this story, Then subscribe and stay, where science and history meet knowledge. Because the next story that might change the way you see history.